Yes. So, it's now the turn of our guest speakers. I'm delighted to introduce first, to propose the toast to the worshipful company of Haberdashers, the school governors and the school, Aman Coonar, who left Habs in 1984 and qualified from Guy's and St Thomas's Medical School in London. He trained first in internal medicine and intensive care, followed by basic science research. This was then followed by general surgery and cardiothoracic surgery, training at a variety of London hospitals. Between 2005 and 2007, Aman took senior fellowships at the Toronto General Hospital in Canada in general thoracic surgery and lung transplant surgery. He was appointed president of the Royal Society of Medicine's cardiothoracic section in December 2013. He's now based at Papworth Hospital in Cambridge, but also practices from Bushy. Gentlemen, your life may yet be in his hands. So be kind. He's the governor of schools in Cambridge and is involved in a charity clinic in India as well. He relaxes by spending time with his wife and 6 children. Please join me in welcoming
A professor of mine, actually, in fact, I'm going to change this completely. A professor of mine said to me when I was applying for a job, he looked through my CV and he was going, And then he said, when I look at my CV, I don't recognise myself either. So thank you very much. I barely recognise it, so thank you. But President, distinguished guests, haberdashers and friends, can I ask, can you hear me at the back? Yeah. You can now. Thank you so much for this invitation to come here. I have to in particular thank Simon Greswold, who is a keen old haberdasher. It took him a few moments or a few days to confirm to me that the reason for the invitation was not that perhaps you don't have medical speakers so often, but because some of my friends and so on were in jail or tax exiles, and no one else is suitable to speak. But thank you, Simon. And also, I'm very appreciative that Martin, my dear friend, and Nobby Richard Carlo, who is still very involved in the school, are both here, and I appreciate that because we are just the 4 people from 1984. I left school almost 30 years ago, and I have to confess this is, sadly, but very happily now, my first visit back to Haberdashers Hall of any note. I believe I ran through here about 27 years ago, but there was all the old one. So it is really wonderful to be able to stand in front of you and see all these associations from my past. And I feel that I have, probably like many others who have left the school, been something of a wandering minstrel or a bit of a prodigal son. And to see such a fine welcome is very touching. I appreciate that very much. I've been asked to keep this talk fairly short, and I will do, so if somebody just raises the hand in the second hour, I'll bring it to a close. I'll just, if I may, mention some of the highlights of what I remember, and then tell you a little bit briefly about what I do now and how that may all fit together with my story. My highlights, starting at the prep school and being dropped by my father and hanging on by the old BBC buildings to the school railings. Lost, completely lost. And an older boy came up to me who subsequently I learned had a very tough reputation. In fact, I quite feared him in later years. But actually took me under his wing, and I remember it very distinctly, going from being a lost individual to within a few minutes feeling as if I'd probably been there for a very long time. And that was my very first memory of haberdashers. I was scared to go there because just before I went there, as a small boy, Tom Brown's School Days had been broadcast on TV, and there was this horrendous figure of Flashman. And when I heard that the prep school headmaster was Flashman, I really thought this was somehow part of the way that English public schools were designed. There was a brutal figure who would terrorise you. And of course, I met a wonderful, charismatic, warm man who sadly passed away recently. And he was an inspirational character, and I remember him very well, his motorcycle. And from his obituary, I learned that he was actually born in India, as I was. I always wondered why he was quite tan, but there we go. So at this point, I have to put my glasses on, which I didn't wear at school. I remember that beautiful playground we had just below the school, and how we had trees to climb in and to fall out of. And I remember that health and safety wasn't really what it is now. And what a wonderful time that was, even though I remember the guy with a horribly broken arm, and it's a name, but I better not say it now. There was many great teachers, but my very first teacher, Miss Geddy, and I don't know if any of you recall her, she was a warm, caring individual, as I remember her. But she did used to say, "Much as I love you, stand away from me," because I think it's all of the boys come up to her. So moving on there to a year or two later, I have enormously fond memories of the school camp down in Dorset, and I actually went there for 4 years through the prep school, and then they had some senior boys from the senior school go along to sort of set up tents and marshal the youngsters. And I don't think there were that many boys of Indian origin who learned to swim off in the English Channel in cold Dorset, but I have a huge affection for that part of the country and walking along the Jurassic coast. Now on to senior school, new friends, bigger fields, very good teachers, but what I remember and what I recall and what I had fun doing was going on the assault course, being involved in sports, which for me were cut short pretty badly at the age of about 14, 15 when I injured my neck. And the RAF section was a very important part of my experience there. And Martin was in that with me. We ran it together, really. Simon was in the army, and Nobby was doing far more interesting things, I'm sure, at home. I was pretty good at school academically, like many of us. I was absolutely hopeless at French. I think I was the only boy in school who didn't do French O-level. I managed to find some combination and way of not doing it. But the RAF section and my interest in science led me to a career choice. And I decided that I was going to be an astronaut. And as you have heard, I'm not an astronaut. And the reason I'm not an astronaut may in part be because I went along to the RAF medical, and they actually said my femur length was too long to train as a jet pilot. And at that time, if you were going to have any aspiration of doing that, you had to be able to fly fast jets. So I had to shelf that. And somehow or other, I'm still unclear about how it happened, I ended up in a medical school and started going through. Now, Guy's Hospital, just across the river, Guy's and St Thomas's Hospitals in the 80s is a very different place to what it is now. It is not surrounded by Shishi Borough Market, and I think some of our older generation will know it well from that time. It was Dickensian and bombed out. And it was a rough place, but we had a good time there. Now, at that time, medical schools were still mostly men, and as you may imagine from what you may have seen on television or friends in medical school, we worked hard and we played hard. So we did our lectures. At 5 o'clock, we went to the bar. A pint of beer was 39 pence before special offers. And we had a mission which was called 6 before 6. And we then used to play pool. And this, of course, is a group of people who all went on to successful medical careers. And then we used to go off and do other things. It was a very male environment, actually. And but how do we cope with that? Well, Guy's Hospital Medical School is right next door to the nurses' home. And next door to that is the physiotherapy thing. So there was a lot of recreation. Now, there are so many things from medicine that I could talk about, so I will keep it to very few. And the things that are the most defining for me. I said to you that Guy's Hospital is in a rough area, or used to be in a rough area. As a medical student, I was on call one night, and we were embedded into the firms, a real apprenticeship model, which perhaps the founders of this place would be able to identify with. Very different to the style of medical training now. And there was with me a foreign junior surgeon, and he was the person on call that night for the whole of this grand hospital, and there was a consultant at home. And a young man was stabbed and rushed into the accident and emergency department, and we rushed to see him. And my senior colleague, who was perhaps just 3 or 4 years older than me, asked me, should we take this boy to theatre? Because this boy was shocked, he was dying. And I felt at that moment some of the decisiveness that I had learned at our school came through. And without any hesitation or reservation, we took him to theatre, and we took out that boy's kidney and saved his life as the consultant arrived into the hospital. Now, the times have changed, and for those of us who seek medical attention these days, we will be seen by doctors who have a completely different experience there. And that, for me, is a bit of a worry. But I'm not here to complain about medicine. Not at all. That was one very important experience, a defining moment. I'll leap forward a whole period of training and experience, and this was now to the 7th of July 2005, which you all remember as the day of the London bombings. I was now in St Thomas's Hospital, on call. I hadn't moved very far, and it was the morning, and we heard something come out over the radio and television within the hospital, and we could sense it wasn't some sort of power failure on the tube or something like that. And the hospital moved to a higher alert status, and the hospital turned into a military encampment, and it became organised like a military service. And we waited for the casualties to come in, and the experiences I had, just in a small way, when we did our night exercises, when we played on the fields, that teamwork just came through. And I remember feeling the same way as we felt when we were playing against another team and the chips were down, but we had to keep going. Now, I was a cardiothoracic surgeon by this stage, and what we do as part of our work is we stop hearts, we stop lungs, we stop the circulation, we do what we need to do, and then we restart it. And when the casualties came in, it's not usual in that environment to have cardiothoracic surgeons. When the casualties came in, we re-triaged people from unsalvageable to salvageable. And I know that some of the people who are alive today are because of what we did that day when it came to be asked to do it. And when the work was done, you'll remember the transport systems were down. We picked up our bags, and I remember walking home to Dulwich. And that was a very memorable day. Now, I said to you earlier on that I wanted to be an astronaut. I went to Canada, and I went there because Toronto General Hospital is the best place in the world to do thoracic surgery, and it's actually where the first lung transplants were done. And I went there because I wanted to work with the best. Now, when we do a lung transplant, or in fact any transplant, there's tragedy mixed with triumph. And what we do, or what the teams do, is we go to where the donor is, a broken body held together by an intensive care machine, and we deal with the family's grief. We optimise this shattered body that is brain dead and prepare to take the organs. And we do that very gently, and then life drifts away. And then we take those organs to base, where our teams are preparing the recipient. And the recipient might be days, hours from death, and we have the enormous satisfaction of implanting those organs, and then a day or two later we take them off the ventilators and they breathe. And it is wonderful. Now, I was retrieving organs from above the Arctic Circle. We were based in Toronto, and we would fly out in these jets, and go to the local hospital where they have a small intensive care unit, do what we had to do and bring the organs back. And as we took off, we were flying towards the south, and there was a storm coming in. So the pilot said to me, we're going to have to fly higher. And up we went, the journey time was increased, and as we went up above the clouds, I could see the sun rising in the east, and the other way, I could see the northern lights. And I was so high, and at that moment I was so alone, it was so quiet, the air was so thin, but I felt I had become the astronaut. And that is enormously memorable to me. So, the reason I said that is because I had dreamt about it since I was a child. And of course, Haberdashers School in Elstree, which we're all part of, is part of that childhood. And as an adult, much older, this dream had in a very small way been made reality. And I now remember when I was sitting, as many of you probably did, in a class, perhaps not paying attention to the lesson, and looking out over our wonderful sports fields, and wondering how long could this beauty last, and would we ever remember it? And truly, I remember that every single day. So in that small space between perception and seeing it for real, and imagination, what we think of, therein lies that connection with a school that probably part of me has never left. So, gentlemen, I would ask you to take your glasses. I do not know the protocol, but for those of you who wish to, please be upstanding. And I will give to you the toast, which is the worshipful company of haberdashers, the school governors, and the school.
Company governors and school.
Aman, thank you so much for that. We've been privileged to hear over the years many fine speeches in this hall, but I'm sure I speak for many of us when I say none with quite the same sense of awe and humanity as you articulated tonight. And now allow us to turn to the school captain, Rufus McAlister, whom I've had the pleasure, and this is one of the incidental benefits of being lumbered with a seating plan, I've had the pleasure of choosing myself to sit next to him tonight for some very sensible reasons. Firstly, because I want to get to know him, and he's a good guy, and I have a few choice snippets to relate to you that he's imparted to me tonight. Firstly, gentlemen, I've built a new best places for smoking on the Elstree grounds. Secondly, I've learned that the old tennis courts, where I thrashed about only because I didn't want to do rugby, they are now football pitches, and tennis matches, proper matches, I argue, are held in Radlands. So times change. Rufus is interested in hockey and swimming. He's not only volunteered to be a leading member of the OHA in future years, but also to set up a hockey club. I jest slightly, but only slightly. He looks, not only does he play the French horn, he's going on to read, fingers crossed, English at Cambridge, and I'm sure we'll enjoy a fantastic speech from him tonight as I introduce the school captain, Rufus McAlister.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I have quite a bit to live up to now. Mr. President, honoured guests, gentlemen, it was only yesterday that I had my final day in school. I started in Mrs. Francis's class, P2, in the prep in 2003. 4 foot 2 inches tall, with a school bag that was probably heavier than myself, an eagerness to learn, a love of humour, and a desperation to show off every single fact that I'd memorised about dinosaurs. Fast forward 11 exciting, happy and at times hilarious years, basically my childhood. And here I am today, startled but pretty impressed at how slick and efficient the Haberdashers machinery is. Yesterday was my last day as a schoolboy, but here I am, barely 24 hours later, already partaking in the enormous pleasures that come with being an old haberdasher. At this rate, by the time I leave this beautiful hall tonight, I will have signed away 5% of my future earnings to the Habs Foundation, become a life member of the OHA, and put McAlister Jr.'s name on the Habs waiting list for 2013. And what, I wonder, will Habs look like in 2034, when McAlister Jr. arrives on day one, proudly sporting his dad's Meadows tie? Will the school look broadly the same? The picturesque cricket grounds, the smart grandeur of Oldham House, and of course, the central icon of the quad. But what about the people? Maybe the headmaster will have taken the lead from Eurovision and have grown a beard and maybe the other thing will have changed. Will the school have forged even closer ties with the girls next door? This year there were several joint collaborations, not least the stunning music performance in the Barbican, packed out with parents, families, friends, teachers and old boys. I think it really captured the spirit of what it means to be in Habs. I am a French horn player, and whilst I appreciate the sumptuous mellow tone the instrument can produce, I tend to just blast the notes out. I am, however, very grateful for the advice Mr. Moody in the music school have imparted with me over the years, such as, why don't you just pretend to play in this piece? With traditional sports continuing to flourish, will it be the same in 2034, or will rugby, hockey and cricket be replaced by synchronised swimming, extreme ironing, unicycle jousting, or worm baiting? These are all registered sports. And with regards to worm baiting, the record, when I checked online this morning, stands at 567 worms. This year we have won the National Schools Water Polo competition, a pretty impressive achievement. And in cricket, a boy in my year scored a century against the MCC a couple of weeks ago. I am a keen hockey player, and our first 11 enjoyed victories over St Albans and Watford, the first time we've achieved this particular double in a few years.
Well done.
In 2034, will the school play have been replaced by a school podcast available on Netflix? It would certainly allow Mr Norton's inventive productions to be viewed by a wider audience. This year's play, The Recruiting Officer, is visually stunning, and once again, Habs boys' abilities in performing accents and tight breeches were shown. I hope young McAlister will want to join the combined cadet force, which has been a particular highlight of my time at Habs. There are 2 new CCF staff members who have overseen the programme this year, and it has been an eventful one. Field days have been action-packed, and one boy in the current lower SIG has won a scholarship to Sandhurst. From my perspective, it has been particularly successful, as I achieved a promotion from corporal to sergeant and finally to the lofty position of coffee boy. And I have thrived in a demanding role of making hot beverages for the upper SIG cadets. In 2034, somehow, I feel that even if the buildings have changed, even if the people have changed, the spirit of Habs will never change. As I look back at what defined my arrival in P2, the following 11 years, and now the future, it is this spirit, this eagerness to learn, this love of humour, and this desperation to show off that unites Habs boys. Thank you.
Rufus, thank you so much. Excuse me while I throw my notes on the floor and discuss. I would say the only reason Habs boys are so good at showing off is because they have the core material to enable them to show off. And now let us turn to Roger Putnam. On leaving Habs in 1963, Roger went on to join Lotus, rising to Director of Sales and Marketing. Roger's first company car at Lotus in 1966 was the self-same Lotus 7 used in the cult TV series The Prisoner. And I assure you I've checked up on Google Images to verify this now. Number plate and all. He was headhunted by Sir John Egan to join Jaguar as worldwide marketing and UK operations director. And then from Jaguar, Roger moved on to be the chairman of Ford of Britain. From 2005 until 2006, he was president of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. He was then a member of the government's Energy Review Partnership and Automotive Innovation and Growth Team, and in June 2007 was awarded a CBE for services to the British motor industry. Roger is now the chairman of ITM Power, which specialises in hydrogen fuel cells and other green technology. He's a visiting professor of automotive business at the City of London University, but more importantly than all of this, has kindly agreed to speak to us tonight. Please welcome Roger Colin.
My word, I've got to live up to it. Very generous introduction. Thank you very much, Andy. Mr. President, honoured guests, haberdashers, gentlemen. That's mutually exclusive, isn't it? I can't tell you how honoured I am. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Sure. I can't tell you how honoured I am to be here in the hall of one of the great 12 livery companies. I've actually been a liveryman myself for the last 30 years as a coach maker and coach harness maker. And I'm always proud to be associated with the ancient mysteries, as they're known, of the City of London. Now, why am I here? I suspect I'm here as a result of a terrible conspiracy between Tony Alexander and Andrew Tarpey. Tony I knew during my time at school, although then he was known as Beat or Beetle. In fact, I didn't realise he had a proper Christian name until a few years ago. Don't get me wrong, Tony is a great friend, but not of mine anymore. Andrew works for Jaguar Land Rover, of which more anon. Now, let me start by involving you in a little audience participation. There's a way of getting things going. I did start by thinking that you could squeeze the thigh of the person on your left, but I thought, no, this is too august a gathering to do that. And I have to admit with some shame that this is the first Old Haberdashers event I've been to. So I'd like a show of hands for the number of people here who read Martin Baker's call to arms for this evening's event, saw my name and said, who the hell is he? Come on, hands up. It's a difficult question. Who am I? That is a rhetorical question, by the way. I'm not going to say that. Firstly, I'm not Matt Lucas, who I was told was a prospective speaker tonight. I can hear someone saying, yeah, I know. I'm not one of the 1960 leavers that is Martin Sorrell or Simon Sharma. And I'm not.
They're not here.
No, absolutely. That's why I said that. I'm not that well-known sports presenter on the TV. Although I have to admit that when I was parking the car a little while ago, I overheard one lady of a certain age turn to her friend and say, "Eerie, it's that Les Diamond." In fact, I did meet Des at a social function shortly after that and told him that someone had called me Les Diamond, and he was very impressed as he walked off. As part of my brief tonight, I was asked to dish the dirt on my contemporaries at school. Calm down, Chad. Now, I really had to search my memory, as I have to say, during my time at school, I seemed to float through the 7 years at Westfield Road and Elstree, enjoying the challenges of European languages, the CCF, as many people here have said, and the 10 Tours competition. Or in the case of our team, the 1 Tour. Sadly, John McGowan isn't here tonight. I was going to ask him how the blisters were doing, but and I was also captain of fives. Now, some of you may know what that means, but when I speak to 99% of the population, they have no idea what fives is. But I do have some dirt to dish here. I do have photographic evidence that Rod Jakeman borrowed one of my girlfriends for a while. The one thing I do remember, that's true, I don't. However, I do remember vividly my first trip abroad with Taffy Barling's French Adventure in 1961. It was very, very memorable to me, apart from being my first trip aboard and my ability to practice my latent French. But I met the first girl who let me kiss her. I mean, heavy stuff, chaps, come on. Sadly, she was only half my height, so our relationship was doomed, as I had to adopt the posture of Quasimodo to get anywhere near her lips. And anyone who was on that trip, I'm sure will remember. When I left in '63, I thrust myself immediately into the world of commerce. I joined a subsidiary of Courtaulds, involved with the production and sale of ladies' garments to Marks and Spencer's, amongst other companies. Now, my official title was assistant to the managing director, but I soon realised I'd made a very poor choice of career when I overheard someone describe me as, "Is that chap who travels in ladies' underwear?" So what to do? I mean, long before the days of these wonderful executive search companies, I was looking through the classified ads in the Telegraph. Yes, national broadsheets did have classified ads for jobs in those days. And I saw a vacancy for an export salesman at Lotus Cars, then based in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire. I applied, and before I knew it, I was on my way to see the MD in my Morris Minor 1000. Now, secretly in my dreams, I was a racing car nut and couldn't wait to drive sexy sports cars, as I convinced myself that this was the route to meet girls, hopefully of the same height as myself. For those of you who are not seduced by Formula One racing, I should explain that in those days Lotus enjoyed the kind of fame that Red Bull racing enjoys today. Its founder was a chap called Colin, who was a revolutionary engineer, and he had formed a unique relationship with a quiet lowland Scottish farmer called Jim Clark. And in the mid-60s, Team Lotus was winning everything in all classes of motorsport. The company also manufactured road-going sports cars and assembled, in those days, the Lotus Cortina before. I didn't meet Colin until about 8 months after I joined the company. By that time, the company had moved to an old US air base in Norfolk with a purpose-built factory, I suspect hugely subsidised by national government. Now, I too had moved on and was the proud owner of my very own Lotus Elan. Now, I don't know about you chaps, but I think many of us aspire to have a building or an office block or a road named after us. I've got one. In darkest Norfolk, there's a stretch of road called Putnam CBE. I'll tell you how that came about. I don't know if many of you have actually driven in Norfolk. There is a phenomenon called black ice. Now, this can catch you out because there is absolutely no sign of snow or frost when there is black ice about. I was driving my Elan into work on the back lanes one morning, and I was just cresting a switchback on a perfectly straight piece of road when I discovered black ice. And of course, the back end of the car stepped out, and of course, I fancied myself as a racing driver, so I steered into the skid once, twice, 3 times, and strangely enough, each skid got bigger than the last one. Finally, I ran out of road and hurtled into a field on the side of the road. The car finished upside down, and thank God that I wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was thrown out and landed on my feet about 10 yards away. Strangely enough, my Chelsea boots, I was always an icon, fashion icon, were still in the footwell of the car. Absolutely true. Unknown to me at the time, Chapman was behind me driving his enormous Ford Galaxy. This was a gift from Ford, not the Galaxy we know today, but one of those big American Detroit metal monsters. He'd been given the car by Ford for winning the Indianapolis 500 race in 1965. Now, he hadn't seen me leave the road, and to my horror, as I stood behind my overturned Elan with the wheels still turning, he stopped the car at the point where I'd gone off the road, and then proceeded to walk round the Galaxy kicking the tyres, because he thought he'd had a puncture. He didn't know about black ice either. As he was getting back into the Galaxy, he finally saw me standing by the overturned Elan. I looked at him tremulously, was expecting something like, "Oh, bad luck, can I give you a lift?" He said, "Is that a company car?" I said, "No, sir, it's my own." Fucking good job was it? And he drove off. That's how to impress your boss. Now, it didn't seem to harm my career a great deal because I spent another 15 years with Lotus in Norway and got to know Colin Chapman very well. He was a leader of quite magnetic charm, as long as you didn't get on the wrong side of him. Somebody once said, and I absolutely believe this, that if you went for a country walk with him, you finished up climbing Everest. But like so many racing drivers turned businessmen, he only knew one direction, and that was to win at all costs. There were no shades of grey with Colin, between black and white. It made him a very difficult man to work for. If you did the deal for him, it was never good enough. He'd get seller's remorse. If you bought something for the company, he'd get buyer's remorse and claim you paid too much. I guess this is what drove him. To win on the track, he became obsessed with lightweight structures. His great opponent on the track at that time, of course, was Enzo Ferrari. And he is alleged to have said about Colin, "In Ferrari we make cars from solid metal, and we drill holes in them to make them light. This Chapman man, he makes cars from plastic and aluminium, and adds metal to make them heavier." If you look at Google, you will see lots of quotes ascribed to Colin. But I remember one very vividly that I just had an absolute reaming from him on sales performance. And we were walking back to his office, and he turned to me and laughed and said, "Don't take it so seriously, Podger." He used to call me Podger Runner, I don't know. Just remember, life's a game. I just use money to keep the score. Colin sadly died in 1982. He was only 54. And the day he died, he actually chose to cross swords with a certain man called Bernie Eccleston. And he lost a decisive battle over racing car engineering with him at the FI in Paris. Colin flew back to the UK himself and died in the early hours. A sad end to a true engineering genius. I heard Bernie actually on the telly the other day say that he counted Colin as a great friend. I'm not sure about that. I'd been headhunted into Jaguar before Colin died. And I joined Jaguar when it was still part of that wonderful conglomerate called British Leyland. Colin and I were talking about it earlier. BL, as you may know, owns such wonderful brands as Austin, Morris, Rover, Stand, Triumph and MG. And they all, apart from MG, have one thing in common now. They don't exist anymore. It's hard to remember that MG was once the biggest seller of sports cars in the USA. And BL almost single-handedly gave the Japanese the opportunity to grow in Europe through a mixture of management failures and appalling industrial relations. Who can forget that wonderful man, Derek Robinson, or Red Robbo as he was known, who called 523 walkouts in 18 months. Then there were the Friday cars. Anyone who owned an Austin 1800 or the Leyland Land Crab, as it was known. I'm sure you all know that Friday cars were seen to be the worst you could buy because they were thought as the workers wanted to knock off. It was rumoured at the time I joined Jaguar that BL had a special calendar made with a week comprising 5 Fridays. Now, Jaguar sadly had not escaped from this malaise either. In the States, stories abounded that if you bought a Jaguar, you needed 2, one to park on the drive and the other one in the service shop. But it wasn't just the car manufacturers themselves. It was also the British component industry that suffered. And at that time, the British component supplier, the biggest in Britain, was Joseph Lucas, who made just about every kind of component from fuel pumps to headlights. Their universal advertising strapline was Joseph Lucas, King of the Road. In the States, Lucas was known as the Prince of Darkness, or Joe Lucas, the man who invented dark. BL had actually just built a new paint plant for Jaguar when I joined. And rather like Henry Ford's iconic statement, you could have any Model T as long as it was black, Jaguar for a long while could only paint 3 colours: Alpine white, Carmen red, and Cotswold yellow. As I joined Jaguar, John Egan, then the chief exec and chairman, was given the instruction by Michael Edwards, fix Jaguar or close it. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what have I done? I've gone from one small frying pan into a huge one. And I joined, as Andrew said earlier, as global chief of marketing and UK sales. And my priority task was to prepare the brand and distribution structure for a company independent of British Leyland. And in fact, the company was successfully floated as the first of Maggie's privatisation efforts in 1984, raising £2 billion, which went to the government, not to Jaguar. As a night job at that time, I was given the job of managing Jaguar's racing programme, because John Egan said, well, you're the only one who knows anything about motor racing. So we subcontracted another racing driver turned businessman called Tom Walkingshaw, who engineered the cars and ran the team. We had to find the sponsorship and overall budget. Luckily for me, Tom, who was very canny, a Scot and very canny, he knew I'd worked for Colin at Lotus. So he knew that I knew where he was coming from, and that made a difficult job slightly more manageable. And we were very successful in the 6 years we raced in the 80s, and we won Le Mans twice, and the Daytona 24-hour race twice, and the World Sports Car Championship 3 times. This success, I think, went a long way to repair the damage that had been done to Jaguar by BL. And in fact, once we were free of BL, we grew our volumes and revenues by 500% in 6 years between 82 and 88. And we were up against the minds of Mercedes and BMW, and they were very strong. Now, Jaguar, obviously, as I said, didn't get any of the money that it made when the company was privatised, so we were struggling by the end of the 80s to meet the dividends expected by our shareholders, and of course find the huge investment needed to modernise the plants and invest in new models. However, over in Detroit, a man called Henry Ford II had his eye on Jaguar, and just before he died in 1987, he instructed his management team to buy Jaguar. In 1989, they paid a staggering $2.6 billion to buy Jaguar from the shareholders, and a whole new area began in Jaguar's life. I have to say the new relationship didn't get off to a very auspicious start. Alex Trotman, later Lord Trotman, who was then head of Ford of Europe at the time, said as the Ford deal was completed to buy Jaguar, that there was nothing wrong with Jaguar's production plant that 2 bulldozers couldn't fix. And Ford's first chairman they put into Jaguar, known as the Iceman, a guy called Bill Hayden, who in fact was the man, if any of you saw Dagenham Girls, he was the man running Dagenham at that time. Added to the mix by stating in the leading car magazine that he'd seen better manufacturing plants in Gorky. However, notwithstanding, Ford spent billions investing in new models and turning Jaguar's manufacturing processes into some of the best in the world. And Jaguar moved from 32nd out of 32 importers in the States in terms of customer satisfaction to number 2 inside 5 years. When I left Jaguar in 2001 to join Ford, we were selling around 150,000 cars a year. When I joined in 82, it was 14,000. After Jaguar, I spent 5 years as chair of Ford of Britain. Most of that time I spent trying to persuade the last government that manufacturing was alive and well in the UK and life existed outside the financial services sector in the city. I'm not sure they got the message. However, since then somebody has listened, because today Britain is manufacturing more cars each year than ever before. Okay, so 99% of the industry is foreign owned, but if that's what makes it work, so be it. Britain has always been a tremendous source of great conceptual science and engineering. Sadly, in the past, we gave much of this expertise away because nobody here wanted to put money in to turn that fantastic science and technology into a manufacturing base. But things have changed for the better. If you think about it, 90% of all Formula One design and engineering still takes place in the UK, led by UK engineers. This is much of that cutting-edge technology that will transfer back into future transport of all kinds. Outside the motor industry, just think of James Dyson and all those other new high-tech companies spreading out at Cambridge and Oxford. Britain can be very proud of where it stands, both in Europe and the world. Sadly, the stone throwers and naysayers will always try to overturn the paradigm shift that's taken place in the last 10 years. Now, I've been very lucky in the last 60 years. I went to a great school. I avoided the risk of studying 13th century Spanish prose at university. I survived Putnam and Colin Chapman. And I, in fact, survived Jeremy Clarkson's threat in the Sunday Times to shove his Ford GT somewhere painful. Well, Jeremy, if you will fit a non-standard alarm and immobiliser to your car, you might expect the car to sound like a wailing banshee in the middle of the night. And I got through this speech without one red roll being thrown. So much has changed in the automotive world since I joined in 1969. I think, to me, it's summed up by an American customer when he said to me when I was at Lotus, "You make great cars that run superbly for 90 minutes on the track. Can't you make your road cars last a little longer?" I'd really like my car to start, run and stop, at my command, not the car's. That's my story. Thanks so much for listening to me. Please be upstanding and raise your glasses. The toast is the associate.
Roger, thank you very much. Not only was that a tour de force, I would almost say there's also a tour de force. If you'll forgive me for extemporising for just one moment, we make great play amongst the old Haberdashers community, rightly, of our creative arts and our more expressive subjects, but because they're less demonstrative, we don't shout so much about maths, science, technology, engineering, medicine. I'm so glad that both Aman and Roger, you articulated the great work that the school does in those subjects. Thank you very much. And now for our presidential reply from Colin Blessley. As the third Blessley to have served the association as president, the OHA is truly in his blood. Yeah. And we are very lucky to have him as our president. Colin's keen accounting eye, honed after a lifetime's experience around the world, benefits the OHA's accounts, and his generosity when at the bar cheers member spirits. He will, of course, be delighted to see you in the Bishop's Finger afterwards to demonstrate this fact. It's new news, but it's great news. He is unflappable, sagacious, generous, and occasionally hirsute, but better yet, he is our president, Colin Blessley.
This truly is the graveyard spot, isn't it? Honoured guests, gentlemen. Roger, hard act to follow. I realised, actually, listening to Roger and talking to her earlier this evening, that we actually could have crossed at some point in time during our careers, because I actually was with British Leyland, more or less at the time that you were with British Leyland, but in a more glamorous part of it. I was with British Leyland in Spain at the time. We made Minis and Austin 1300s, which were incredibly exciting, and lost an awful lot of money doing it. I have the privilege of actually having liquidated a British motor manufacturer twice. I liquidated British Leyland Spain, and probably a few decades later liquidated MG Rover Spain. How you can knock them out twice is beyond me, but anyway. This, regrettably, what follows is a bit of a state of the nation report, so forgive me for not being quite as entertaining as my previous speakers, who have both been exceptional, or fulfilling being exceptional. When I was coerced, shall I say, or no, I was elected as president a couple of years ago.
You were coerced.
We actually set out a strategic agenda. And one of those main objectives was to make sure that the OHA continued to be alive and in rude health. I think we can today say that that is the case. There are a few significant things that have happened since we were last here a year ago that I think it's important to share. Many of you would have heard much about the relocation project, which involves moving away from our historic home at Croxdale Road, which is beloved by many and hated by some, but certainly some of our forebears actually constructed themselves and extended themselves, and I certainly contributed to part of their effort. But I think it's fair to say that we are approaching the final phase, we could say in the home straight. We have a team of professional consultants working with us, preparing what we trust will be the road towards planning consent. Gob and Hertsmere won't. I'm not sure who has the upper hand there, but and I would sincerely like to provide further details in the very near future. Obviously, the matter is sensitive. We do have local elections coming up next week, and hopefully Nigel Farage will not have anything to do with it, but hopefully the outcome will be favourable to our aspirations. So watch that space, and it's a very important development. One of the things that was high on my agenda when I took over this role was the matter of the association's finances, which I have to say when I took over, not clear. We had a number of important financial setbacks over the preceding years. However, I'm now happy to say that we do have a very clear picture as to where we stand. We've stabilised our resources, and I think it's fair to say with important contributions from John Wigley, our on treasurer sitting down there, and from our secretary Martin Baker, we are in control of our economic fortunes. One of the important things is that activities which were historical cash drains are now in surplus, which is something that everybody deserves credit for. One of the items on my agenda, and I'm glad that Peter is sitting on my right tonight, and we've had some very instructive, I think very helpful discussions over dinner. We continue to make progress in our relationship with our alma mater. Or should that be alma mater? I'm not sure. I think a number of activities have been organised together, which is good. Most of them centred around rugby at the present time, which is understandable because that's one of our major thrusts as the OH. but I think there's more to be set up in the future, and we're working on it. That we can do more on this front, it is very clear to me, and I think with renewed efforts on both our parts, we can generate some interesting initiatives for the membership going forward. I hope that will be appealing to the larger Old Boys community. Thank you everybody who responded to our membership survey. As you know, this happened earlier on in the year. It was organised by YouGov, which is the private bailiwick of Alan Newman. It was successful. Alan informed us officially that actually the level of response to our survey was much higher than they would expect from a survey around this type of population. So from that respect, it was very encouraging. You responded to us on a wide variety of topics, mostly centred, I think, on our service to our membership. The Executive Committee is actively engaged on responding to those suggestions as to how we can address some of your interests, and I think we're making progress. You'll hear a lot more about those sort of things that we're working on through the newsletter, through the website, and of course through OH Notes. OH Notes, my goodness, our flagship publication. I hope most of you, or all of you, saw the Olympics edition, which was quite spectacular. And I've probably fair to say that few of us believed we could actually do better than that. But I have to say the latest edition, which is focused on the 3 decade throughout our recent history, has come up with some outstanding content and contributions. And I think we owe thanks to Alan Newman, sadly not here tonight because he's on business in the US, as the Red Pen Man, and also to John Wigley, who coordinated a lot of the content and contributions, and certainly Keith Cheney, who provided an awful lot of the arcade content, particularly photographs and the like. It was a great job. Yeah, it's a fascinating read. I think I'd be very remiss in not mentioning at this moment Martin Baker. When I took over as president, one of the tasks that I landed Martin with was turning OH Notes into a break-even proposition. And Martin went out and actively sold advertising space in the magazine. And I think those of you who read it would agree that the latest edition, the advertising is non-intrusive and actually quite discreet and really tasteful. He's done a great job. He turned basically what was a £6,000 deficit activity into a £1,000 surplus activity in 1 year. It's a major achievement. On the social front, Rodney continues to captain the ship, and throughout the year we've done an awful lot. And I think an awful lot of thanks is due to the social committee and also to the volunteer organisers of our various activities. And let's not forget that everything that we do is by voluntary labour. We've implemented a lot of suggestions in response to the survey, and indeed many of the people who are responding to those and organising events are here tonight, and our heartfelt thanks to you for such enterprising and profitable activity. Our resident caterer Colin works miracles every time that we have Her efforts, together with those who serve behind the bar on a voluntary basis, produce some extremely healthy revenues for the organisation, which are obviously very beneficial. I've probably exhausted my goodwill credit by now, because I did set myself the proposition of being brief. So I'd like to say a few words about our sporting activities. Sportsmen who are making a weekly contribution to this organisation. The rugby club's stellar progress of 4 successive annual promotions, I think, has brought us face to face with stiffer competition. It's probably inevitable, really. It led to a mixed season results. I think now is the time for consolidation, and God forbid, maybe for a focus on some more collective training. If you don't broke, don't fix it. It's good to know that we did end the season with a home win against our arch rival Tabard, which is always good stuff. So let's hope that sets the note for next season, and we look forward to some good results. I would like to say that there are 2 items on the social sporting agenda in collaboration with people at the school, which is the 7 days, the 7th day at the school in July, which is a very well attended event. It's great rugby, fantastic teams competing, well worth the visit. So go out there and enjoy it, and not least of which for a very well priced bar. And also, in November, on 22nd of November, we have, I think, what is a signal event, which is the 1970s unbeaten school sides reunion at the school, which is a lunch. There is a school game against, I think it's... That's it, okay. And there is lunch at school, the game, and then drinks at the club. So 22nd November, put it in your diaries. I'm glad to see that Robert and a number of the cricket club members are here tonight. Saturday and Sunday sides continue to improve their game. I think the fixture list is improving as well, and we're getting better results, and we're attracting good new talent, which I think is always an important element in taking sport forward. I have to say, for a personal aspect, for me, the high spot of the year is attending the annual dinner at Lord's, which is an amazing occasion. I would encourage more of you to go to it, because it is a really singular location. You can't get better in the conference room in the pavilion. So go for that in a big setting. The football club, who would dearly love to have a home at the school, the OH grounds. Golf and the shooting club, all doing well and all active and prospering. It is great to see that those activities are all supported by people of varying generations. On my respect, that's it. As you can hear, there's a lot going on. We're not inactive. Take advantage of what's on offer. There's an awful lot that we can do, which I hopefully will be of interest to you. Thanks for your attention. Have a great evening, and Godspeed.